All right, guys, I'm excited to have Robert Sikes back on the show. It's been, I think, a couple years since you were on the show the first time, Robert, and
Hmm.
want to reconnect on your journey and your experiences and your N equals one experiment, how we can get stronger and how do we fuel, how do we train and improve our performance in life as you're the Mr. Strong bodybuilder, natural bodybuilder. And then we've got us endurance athletes. But I'm really been talking about how we endurance athletes need to do more strength training because if they're our listeners as myself, we're getting older and
Yeah.
more cardio is not beneficial to the aging process. And especially for females losing hormones, that we need to counteract that loss of muscle as we age and eat more protein and lift heavy weights and talk about all that. So I wanted you to come on the show to talk about the strength building side and nutrition and all that. So thank you for saving us a little time slot in your busy day.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to jump back on your show. This is something I'm very passionate about. So we can certainly roll up our sleeves and dive into nutrition, strength training. I definitely am an advocate for strength training, especially as you age, as you mentioned. But yeah, I think that's one of the best things anybody can do to, reach that proverbial fountain of youth, so to speak.
Yeah. So you are training for when's your next event? You have a natural bodybuilder, you've got a competition coming up, professional athlete in the
Yep,
bodybuilding
yep. First,
keto.
first show this season is the 2nd of September, and the last show is the 18th of November. So I'm doing 5 competitions this season, which is a lot more than I would recommend anybody to do. But I'm just going for broke here, so we're going all in.
Wow. And talk about if people aren't familiar, I'll put all the links in the show notes to follow you. But you're doing this, is it carnivore, keto carnivore? Kind of what's your way to improve your fueling strategies to improve your muscle gain?
Yeah, so I've been strict keto for the past 8 years. People, depending on how loosely you want to define carnivore, there's all these definitions now.
Yes.
So like 99% of what I eat is carnivore, but I'll also include like a keto brick a day, which is technically not carnivore. We have a garden right now, so every once in a while I have like a spoonful of salsa from vegetables from our garden. That is the extent of which I deviate from carnivore. So pretty minimally, by all intents and purposes.
So if we're trying to get stronger and get more muscle definition and toned, whatever, people want to improve fat, getting lean tissue. So we're increasing our metabolism by getting more strength gains and improving performance just in life. How would you suggest people get started in strength training? Stacy Sims, for example, we talked a lot about is she's for women doing that 3 to 6 repetitions. What's your perspective on athletes or people aging individuals to get stronger and then tie in nutrition on that? How do we get to look like a lean, healthy
Yeah.
individual?
I mean, the main thing with strength training is to just implement some form of progressive overload. So, like, just as there's so many nuances out there in the world of nutrition, same is true with training. People can go online, they can search for the best workout split, and they'll just be inundated with all kinds of information, much of which is conflicting. The main thing is to just do more than what you are currently doing. In most instances, like people are worried about overtraining, and that is the thing, but it's harder to overtrain than people realize, especially if they're getting ample fuel and ample recovery. So if you're implementing progressive overload and if you're, you know, upping the ante, so to speak, on a regular basis, your body will, adapt to that stimulus and grow more lean tissue. So from if someone's coming from zero weight training, then simply doing body weight exercises, resistance bands, something that's very low barrier to entry would be a massive step in the right direction. Then they can graduate to some machines and start incorporating some free weights and some compound movements. But I mean, just honestly starting with a 3 day a week split, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, push pull legs, something super simple like that would be a pretty easy entry for most people. Personally, right now, I'm experimenting with a full body routine. So I'm training 5 to 6 days a week. Every muscle group is getting targeted every day. So the frequency is quite high, but I'm not subjecting any one body part to a ton of load in any one day. So the intensity per muscle group is smaller for the day, but the frequency throughout the week is higher. And my body's been responding really well to that in the context of this prep that I'm currently in. I haven't lost any lean tissue that I can tell. Strength hasn't gone down. So from a muscle preservation standpoint, I think it's been great for me.
And you are sharing all of this in your social media and a blog. I've been reading and you're sharing. Are you doing, CGM, glucose monitoring, blood work during this time at all?
Yeah, blood work throughout the whole. I've actually got a CGM in that just expired like 2 days ago, so I need to put another one in. But I've been trying to document and be as transparent with this as possible because I'm using my specific competition prep protocol, and I want people to glean from this what's possible when you get your nutrition dialed in and you go through it with this protocol. So I'm documenting sleep quality, strength stats, blood work, hormone panels, glucose levels, ketone levels, satiety, other metrics such as like just overall mindset, energy levels, everything really, because I want it to be as transparent as possible. Because in the world of natural bodybuilding, especially, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of. There's a lot of disordered eating tendencies, a lot of very poor health. And I want to just pull the curtain back on that and show people what's possible when they get everything dialed in properly.
How often are you doing blood work?
I'm trying to get it done every 3 months or so. So I'm getting a full comprehensive metabolic panel, lipid panel, hormone panel, all of that every 3 months roughly.
Where are you ordering that through a program online or just?
So I've played around with different programs. In the past, I've gone through like directlabs.com. Just go to like a Quest Diagnostic Center and get those labs drawn. But I actually have a really good relationship with my family doctor. He's health conscious. He kind of in the not keto space, but he's open and receptive to keto. And he's able to get those labs for me at a pretty discounted rate. So I've been using him lately.
That's amazing. I
I feel very fortunate.
A blood chemistry test. I just was ranting on my Facebook page yesterday, doing someone's labs that they got from their doctor, which is cover my insurance once a year. And ideally we should do it every 3 months to 6 months to get preventative and, check that on your biomarkers. But I find it frustrating that the labs people get from their doctor and insurance are just so limited, and you just so much we want to cover. So you have to order them yourself, but it's so nice you have a doctor that understands that, because I find that rare.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like I've gotten like all of those panels I just listed off. I'm getting all of that in one package deal for like $150, and I'm not going through insurance, which is nice. So I can just go there. He's got all of that data in his lab portal, and then I update it all in Heads Up Health, which is kind of what I used to sync all my data together, so I can see it all at a glance. So it's been pretty handy for sure.
Yeah, I've been using Ulta Labs is another way for people to go. And if anyone goes there, they have a 20% off coupon all the time that pops up on the screen. But that's a great way to get them done. So let's go into nutrition, because that's a big topic for athletes of all areas of. It's just conflicting information out there, because we hear in the space of fasted exercise and doing really low carb to zero carb diet that if you are not metabolically damaged, is it what macros are people to start at? And then we not eat before exercise. I mean, it gets very complicated. So I keep revisiting this topic because I think a lot of athletes end up not eating enough and not hitting their protein goals, and they're doing fasted workouts and not eating afterwards. And I know I was doing OMAD for too long a time, but I was working out 3 times a day and just not eating enough, but not really. If you're doing 1 meal a day, how do you get your protein goals? So really revisiting our macros and listening to all the information coming from people in the carnivore space, and then research from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. So what do you think is a good idea for athletes when you are, say, for your community lifting weights, doing a keto carnivore type of diet? How do you fit in, I guess, personally, what you're trying to get your macros in? What's your goal?
So it's going to be a little nuanced for everybody, but there's some general common denominators, so to speak. So when it comes to, protein for somebody trying to build muscle or maintain strength, a good simple rule of thumb, so people don't overthink it, is just simply 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass is a minimum. Like that's a pretty safe estimate. People can go there and feel good about it. When I'm going through this protocol, I titrate protein up at times and I titrate protein down at times. So I've got specific manipulations I'm making throughout the course of a competition prep based off of my goals and how my body's responding individually to those manipulations. So I'll start at a higher fat ratio around my maintenance intake of calories. I'll titrate protein up and fat down until I reach my unique protein threshold. And from there, I'll start dropping protein down. But keep in mind, while I'm in a prep, my goal is not to build muscle so much as it is to preserve all the muscle that I've built up to that point. So that's an important caveat there. When you're trying to build muscle, consuming ample protein, ample calories is key. So making sure you're getting that. And ideally, you'll kind of just disperse that throughout the day in more than one sitting. Right now, I'm doing OMAD because my calories are low enough where it makes sense for me to do OMAD And from a psychological standpoint, it makes the caloric deficit more sustainable to feel actually full and satiated with one larger meal as opposed to multiple smaller meals that leave me wanting more. So I'm doing OMAD at the moment, but in a building phase, I'll typically break my, 3,000 plus calories up to, 2 or 3 meals a day throughout the day. Again, it really just kind of depends whether you're in a building phase or a cutting phase, because that's going to have an impact either way. But to your point, it is very important that people are not chronically restricting and spending too much time in a cutting phase. I get this all the time. I've been shouting from the rooftops the importance of reverse dieting for as long as I can remember. And that's something that is not getting near enough attention. But, ideally, you need to be spending more time in a caloric maintenance or surplus than you are in a caloric deficit, especially when it comes to building and preserving lean tissue and just becoming more resilient as you age. So that's a very important factor there.
Yeah, I think it is, looking at saying OMAD, how are you trying to get all that protein and what are you trying to hit in one meal? Is it because you hear that, oh, you're supposed to have 30, 50 grams of protein spread throughout the day, help that protein synthesis. So when you're just doing all that in one meal, do you have you mentioned a little bit the calorie requirements, and what are you trying to hit in one meal? That's just one meal a day.
Yeah.
People don't want OMAD one meal a day.
When I am building, like I said, I'll split that into 2 or 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
And I'll try and get, at least 30 or 40 grams of protein in each of those meals as a minimum, so that I'm activating muscle protein synthesis, taking in enough leucine with each feeding frequency, et cetera, et cetera. Now, like just speaking for me as an individual, at this caloric intake this week, I'm at about 2,000 calories and 200 grams of protein. I'll have all that in one meal. And that's ample protein throughout the course of a 24-hour period for me to not risk losing lean tissue. And again, I'm going to keep dropping that as I go through this course or through this prep, for the phase that I'm in currently. But with me consuming that much protein over the course of 24 hours and me also activating muscle protein synthesis from my training, I'm not seeing any significant drop at all in lean tissue. So for a finite period of time in the context of this prep, I'm not losing any muscle by only having one feeding frequency throughout the day.
How do you eat that much and not feel totally stuffed? Are you eating till satiety, and then you just how do you get that much in without, because that's why protein, because it fills me up, it keeps me satiated. So for me personally, finding the balance of protein and fat to be I can't eat anything else. But
yeah, well, I'm tracking everything to the T. So everything is measured out literally to the gram. I'm changing macros every single week. Like I've got this down to a science at this point. So right now, this week, I'm consuming 125 grams of fat, 200 grams of protein, and about 15 grams of total carbs. And that's about 2,000 calories. So for me, that's a pretty significant deficit. It's not any trouble at all for me to get that all in one meal. My maintenance intake is around 3,200 calories. So 3,200 calories for me would be a little bit much in one sitting to feel comfortable. But for me in a deficit right now, 2,000 calories goes down really easy.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then go back to explain what is a build phase versus cut phase, if people aren't familiar with the strength training phases, because you have the cut phase everyone talks about.
Yeah. So they're kind of, everybody comes to me and they want to work with me and say, hey, I want to build muscle and lose fat. Okay. That's what everybody wants to do, rightly so. But they kind of compete for one another. So in order to optimize for building lean tissue, you need to ideally be in a caloric surplus so that you have the building blocks necessary to add more tissue. In order to optimize for losing body fat, you need to be in a caloric deficit to optimize for burning that additional adipose tissue. Now, you can do both simultaneously, but you're not going to optimize for either if you're trying to do both simultaneously. So I like to have a defined building phase in which I'm prioritizing, strength gains, muscle building, in which case I'm trying to check 4 main boxes. So I'm eating at a caloric surplus, I'm taking in ample protein, I'm subjecting my body to progressive overload, so ample stimulus to warrant new muscle tissue growth, and I'm focusing on recovery so that my body is able to recover from that training stimulus. In a caloric deficit, when I'm trying to optimize for fat loss, I'll reduce my caloric intake, I'll slightly increase cardio, I'll maintain my strength and training intensity as much as possible so that I don't risk losing lean tissue there and still focus on recovery. But they, again, are kind of competing for one another. So I try to have defined building phases and cutting phases.
And then your cardio, when you as a bodybuilder is doing cardio, what does that mean to you? Like 30 minutes, 20 minutes?
Yeah. So right now, honestly, my cardio is pretty minimal. Like I am 19 weeks into this prep right now, and I started with zero cardio, and I am currently doing 2 20-minute sessions on the Stairmaster at level 15. So not too much cardio. Like I won't exceed 20 minutes at a time. Excessive cardio is just, it works against you. Like it's going to deplete muscle glycogen. You'll lose fullness in your muscles. It'll wear you out. It's going to be hard to recover from. So treating cardio as a minimum viable dose when the goal is body composition improvement, I think is key.
So I keep trying to share that to our listeners, because if you're endurance athletes, you're used to training for 50K trail run or Ironman, triathlon or marathon, half marathon, that people in that mindset get to think cardio more is better. And then they're struggling with, all right, I can't lose weight. I'm doing what I've always done, but I'm gaining weight, even though I'm exercising, doing all this volume of training. And so I'm finding out that, less is more is always my mantra as I get older, that, okay, don't do the same routine over and over again, expecting the different result. Insanity. That the endurance athlete needs to kind of go to the mindset of almost a bodybuilder to really change body composition as we age.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of respect for endurance athletes. Like it takes a special kind of person to have the mindset to, log that many miles in a week and subject themselves to that type of stimulus. So, I mean, I've got a world of respect for that as a sport. But from a physiological body composition standpoint, excessive cardio is certainly not the most effective or efficient means to changing body composition.
No. So would you suggest, like, the strength training, do you add in HIIT training, some plyometrics if you are working with people that aren't doing bodybuilding? Or I don't know, do you do any plyometric stuff in high intensity intervals, short intensity intervals?
Not really. I mean, from a body composition standpoint, as a bodybuilder, I prefer to take that time and allocate it more towards the resistance training. And then I just take the minimal viable approach with regards to the cardio. And I do that steady state, on the Stairmaster. That's not going to put me at really risk of injury. It doesn't really deplete my muscle glycogen by keeping the time intervals pretty short, 20 minutes at a time. And then Stairmaster, I like that as a form of cardio because it's easy to standardize. So like when I'm in a prep, I am manipulating my macros to the T, and I like to be able to manipulate my cardio very strategically as well. So by incrementally increasing that over time, whether it's from the frequency, the duration, or the intensity level, it's very easy to manipulate that if it's something like a Stairmaster, which is easy to standardize because, level 15 is level 15 is level 15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So interesting. So let's talk about nutrition with that. So a typical day for Robert with your nutrition, how are you timing your meals around your workout to allow proper digestion and assimilation?
Yeah. So currently my routine is such that I wake up around 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll go to the warehouse and I'll work for a few hours. I'll have a cup of coffee in the morning, and then I'll train around 6 o'clock in the morning. My training session is normally an hour, hour and a half. And I'll typically have my one and only meal within 2 hours of that training session. So I'll typically be eating around 8 to 9 o'clock or so. And that's pretty much how I break it down. I prefer to train fasted. I feel like my GI handles it better. I've got more energy. I don't feel weighted down by the food. And then I'm, subjecting my body to that stimulus, which is going to increase muscle protein synthesis from that training specifically. And then if I'm consuming a meal within 2 hours of that, I'm not worried about, being catabolic or anything of that nature.
So people always ask, are carbs necessary if you are doing a bodybuilding type of workout versus endurance too? Is it necessary to have carbs to aid in your performance or for you?
Well, I haven't had any in 8 years, so I would say no. And I've only gotten better as a bodybuilder. So I used to use carbs in my bodybuilding days, my early bodybuilding days, but once I went strict keto, I haven't looked back and everything's only improved. So I would argue that it is certainly not necessary. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it. Obviously, there are successful bodybuilders that do incorporate carbs, but it is most certainly not a necessity.
Mm-hmm. And if you worked out later in the day, if you did a 3 o'clock workout, would you just have to stop eating 2 hours beforehand? Or how do you figure out if you did a different time of day, if you ate lunch or eat your meal?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, whatever works best for the individual schedules that it's more sustainable for them is key. So like if, they want to work out in the afternoons, they could eat, a few hours prior to that training session or a few hours after. I'm generally not a fan of eating a massive meal right before going to bed or right before working out. But outside of that, it's really just, dependent upon the individual's preferences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's always, when you can fit it in is the best time of day to exercise. But
Yeah.
I don't like eating before I work out in the morning, and I find it's difficult to have a meal and eat anything beforehand. I'd rather do it fasted, but then there's some information, it's always back and forth to eat or not eat for women versus men. And so I've been trying adding a little butter in my coffee as I used to do back in the day. But if it's, do you do black coffee or do you add some cream in there? Have any calories? How strict how strict do you
Yeah.
find a fasted workout?
So it really just depends on my macro goals for the week. So this week I'm having a whopping 6 grams of fat in my coffee before I train. So that's coming from 6 tablespoons of like a almond coconut based creamer. I prefer heavy cream. It tastes way better, but I don't have the macro allotment to justify that right now. So it really just depends on my macros for the week. But generally speaking, if I'm not in a cut, then I would do, a few tablespoons of heavy cream in my coffee. And technically that's not fasted, but it's not really going to have a glycemic response. And then, training within an hour or so of that. So it's not really going to cause any issues.
Yeah, I've liked the option to add that in, so I don't have to do black coffee because it's not so good to me. But
Yeah,
I've been
people
trying
can
to.
definitely overthink the fasting. I mean,
I
fasting's great,
know
but like
the
there's people that
goal.
I've talked to that are so, religious about not eating any calories or, just toothpaste kicked them out of a fast. And it's like you're majoring in the minors there for sure.
Well, yeah, it defines what is your purpose of the workout. If you're just trying not to have your glucose spike up and cause insulin to be released, is that your goal versus I just want to be in a I was trying to research this. If you're just trying to get cell autophagy from fasting, which you get from exercise, but what's the purpose of not eating at all? And if your goal is to have a good workout, it kind of
Yeah.
what's your why?
And being in a caloric deficit results in autophagy as well. So like I don't ever really recommend, extreme extended fasting while also being in a deficit because it's just too many stressors on the body. I think people certainly abuse fasting as well. Like I'll intermittent fast kind of by default, but I don't really do that much extended fasting.
Well, that's why I think of it as unintentional fasting and eat
Yeah.
intuitively. Listening to your body is the best way, I think, over time to just learn how to do that safely. Because I find a lot of clients are coming to me that are listening to the fasting people to help heal from illness, disease, metabolic dysfunction, but then they're also athletes training at least once a day. And then they're doing extended fasting. That's like, is it necessary? So that's why it's like, okay, you get a lot of benefits from exercise and from, limited fasting overnight from dinner to breakfast. But
Yeah, totally. 100% agree.
so with the nutrition part, there's a lot of talk of like having too much protein was a thing back before people went to carnivore. It was all keto that you can't eat that much protein because it'll kick you out of ketosis. And so the big thing of people being afraid to have protein because they want to stay in nutritional ketosis. So is it important to be in nutritional ketosis all the time? I know you spoke on the carnivore summit and been speaking, but what are your thoughts on the benefit, the why, when, and when not to be nutritional ketosis?
Yeah, so it's funny, like with the whole protein thing, I've been in the space long enough to see all these trends come and go.
Yes.
So for a while there, everybody was fearful of protein and gluconeogenesis, and they avoided it like the plague. And now it's like the pendulum has swung so far the opposite direction that people are advocating protein at all times. You can't possibly overdo protein, eat it in excess, and that's not really ideal either. There needs to be like this leveling effect. Protein's incredibly important. I don't ever want to downplay the significance of protein, but there's a point at which it's going to have diminishing returns. I mean, too much protein relative to dietary fat is going to result in some GI distress, some unnecessary gluconeogenesis. Not that gluconeogenesis should be avoided, but you shouldn't try to capitalize on it. And like you'll just not feel optimally. You may notice some more joint pain and inflammation, some more brain fog, things of that nature. So like I just hit my protein threshold last week, which is why I'm now starting to drop my protein. But I was experiencing some GI distress from that elevated protein. So everyone's going to have their own unique threshold. So just kind of experiment and figure out what that is. Don't be fearful of protein, certainly, but also don't, throw caution to the wind and just consume it in an excess to the point where you're not getting ample dietary fat, because that's where your energy is coming from if you are, in fact, trying to optimize for fat adaptation.
Yeah. So fat adaptation is big. So eating more fat for that reason, but also building our hormones, as we've been talking about, hormones as we age drop down, but how to Dr. Elizabeth Bright, we did a couple podcasts about that, like adding in, she's more 80% fat, 20% protein, and low carbs, but just how to focus on eating more healthier, higher fat diet and getting your protein, figure out the macronutrient ratio for you as an individual to feed your hormones, get more fat adapted, get your protein. So you're building that muscle, not losing it as you age. I think is so important.
Yeah, I mean, operating on the fringe extremes is generally not good when it comes to manipulating fat and protein. Like, you don't want to be too high or too low in either of those macronutrients. Carbs are non-essential, so you certainly don't have to have the carbs coming in. But if you're playing it fast and loose with the fat and protein, and you're really pushing the extremes, like, you're probably not going to feel optimal.
Mm-hmm. So gluconeogenesis is making your glycogen from fat and protein. So a lot of people say, as we're saying, you just said carbohydrates are not essential. They're not needed, but we can replace the muscle glycogen and liver glycogen by eating fat and protein through that process of gluconeogenesis. So if that's where you're timing what you eat, when you eat, how you eat, so you can replace the muscle glycogen for your workouts.
Yes. And then also, like, as you become more deeply fat adapted by not consuming carbohydrates, your body's metabolic machinery upregulates to become more efficient at replenishing muscle glycogen and also not using as much muscle glycogen in the absence of carbohydrates. So I, don't really ever feel like my muscle glycogen stores are depleted, even though I'm not ever replenishing them with the introduction of carbohydrates. Like, my body is really efficient at not depleting that and then replacing what it does use via the fats and proteins I'm consuming.
And that's where it gets confusing. Suggestions out there for someone that is doing endurance training and racing at higher heart rate levels, that they need that quick fuel if it's having a little bit of something within a workout. So timing fuel that might have a little carbohydrates in a workout, because if I'm doing a 3-hour race and I'm doing a lot of tempo or speed work, hill sprints, that I could tolerate a little more carbs. I'm not going to have a beef stick and be able to digest it properly and get instant fuel. So that's where I always hear different sides of the industry going, okay, that's where the strategic carb timing comes in. Have a little bit of honey or having a little bit of S fuels train that has some slow release glucose, so you can get it quick enough to help aid in performance, versus the bodybuilding strength training. You're not looking for that quick energy because that's not what you don't need that. So it's always like, are
Yeah.
carbs bad? When do you need them? Is it necessary? But
I totally hear where you're coming from there. I feel like I don't have as much of a leg to stand on because I'm not an endurance athlete.
yeah.
But my belief is that as you become more deeply fat adapted for length of adaptation time, your body becomes increasingly efficient at replenishing that muscle glycogen in the absence of carbohydrates. So I've got a wild hair to just start doing endurance sports after this prep season so that I can prove to the people that say you can't do it without carbs wrong, because I just like proving people wrong. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for, strictly for 8 years now. So my body's ability to replace, replenish, and, preserve muscle glycogen in the complete absence of dietary carbohydrates is through the roof. And I have no doubt that if I was to go into the endurance sphere, I wouldn't have any issues from an energy standpoint. And I've done some things, like I ran a marathon with zero training, never once bonked or had any issues with energy, but I'm going to have to just push the limit and do like a, ultra marathon to prove people wrong, I guess.
Well, that's what Kristen Raoul was doing, their bodybuilding. Then she was doing some marathon this fall. So we were talking about that as well. But that's what when I stopped doing Ironmans before I got my adrenal exhaustion stuff, in 2012, I was doing coconut butter packets on the bike ride in an Ironman Canada. And I was doing UCAN, which is slow release, but I was mostly just doing electrolytes, amino acids, and having the fat. And then I forget what I did on the run, where you can add in fuel if you need that gel. But I think it was a good experiment because I was training. I was more metabolically efficient, burning tons of fat at higher heart rates because I would do metabolic testing. And so you can, you're more fat adapted. You can train at higher heart rates and burn a lot higher percentage of fat and do that glycogen sparing. So you don't need that. But then maybe when you get on an Ironman, getting to a run might be different. But I think, it'd be fun to see Maybe we'll hook you up. I just recorded last week Zach Bitter. We'll
Yeah.
have you do
Yeah,
a
I've had
trail
Zach
run.
Bitter on a few times, and I've never wanted to come across as dogmatic around carbohydrates. Like certainly people can consume them, and if you're healthy and metabolically sound, like who am I to tell you not to consume them? Like if it's working for you, more power to you. But I don't believe that there's any instance in which you have to consume carbohydrates to excel at an optimal level. If you have the proper level of fat adaptation in place. So I just kind of want to point to that as my
Yeah.
belief.
And
So,
then,
but again, I'm not an endurance athlete, so I'm just gonna have to become an endurance athlete, I guess,
yeah,
to showcase
test it out. So with your training, coaching, how do you teach people to be fat adapted? What's your thoughts on that?
Honestly, just getting them on a well formulated ketogenic diet or carnivore diet. Carnivore is just a subset of keto, and getting that dialed in for them personally, making it sustainable for them, figuring out what macronutrient manipulations they respond best to, figuring out what ratio their body responds best to, and just getting them dialed in to perform optimally with that style of eating, as opposed to including a bunch of carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, things of that nature. And that's worked really, really well for all of them.
So how do you monitor what works best for them? Is it just, I feel energetic, I have no cravings, I'm full for 4 hours? What's kind of your markers to check, okay, is that working for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm checking everything. So I'm checking, depending on how deep they want to go. Like we'll check blood work, we'll check hormone panels, we'll check energy levels, subjective measures, strength stats, blood work, sleep quality, digestion, GI distress. Like we'll go as deep as they want to go with it, because there's going to be a period of time in which they do need to adapt. Especially if they're coming from a standard American diet. They've got to change their microbiome. They've got to change their energy source. Like a lot of things are changing. So just being really mindful of that, and keeping conscious of everything that's changing simultaneously, and then manipulating one thing at a time so that we can get dialed in without having so many variables in the kitchen is key.
I think that is key, to one thing at a time. I think people get overwhelmed and they try to do 20 different things. And I know as a coach, I'm always holding back, like, hey, let's prioritize, create a plan, action plan that we're just, let's do this one thing, focus on that, then add in. But then you get, my clients are the high performers that are try to more is better. so have to,
Yeah.
okay, don't do all this at once. Let's just do one thing. And then or else they give up and they quit.
Yeah, I'm all for, removing variables from the equation, treating it like any good scientist would a well-formulated scientific experiment, and then just getting things dialed in, and then, adjusting as need be. But everybody's different. There are some common denominators for sure, because we're all the same species. But yeah, I think, really looking at it from a holistic approach is key.
Now, do you do lab testing? You mentioned gut health and digestion. Do you add in a GI map type of test, look at their microbiome? How are you doing that with your clients?
Yeah, if they're having some continual GI issues, then yeah, we'll go deeper down that route. Most of the time we can get things resolved without having to get that, GI testing done. Mostly it's just a matter of figuring out what foods they respond well to, and then giving their body ample time with those foods or after eliminating those foods, because it takes a little bit longer for the GI to fully assimilate any changes you're making and kind of reach an equilibrium point. So, making sure that we're not just jumping from one thing to the next before ample time has passed is key.
Do you have any thoughts on talking about the microbiome, of having any fermented vegetables, having fiber, and the whole talk of being a more of an animal-based diet? That is it necessary to have good gut health that we need to add in some vegetables, fermented vegetables,
Yeah,
fiber to improve that health?
I don't think it's necessary, but I certainly don't think it's a bad thing either. Like for people that like those foods, that want to incorporate some vegetation, I think, fermented foods is certainly the way to go, because we aren't ruminants. We're all monogastric species, so we don't have the longer cecum and colon to digest, raw food like a cow would, for instance. So getting something that is pre-broken down via, fermented food is going to be great. But then really just figuring out how their body responds to those foods. Like some people really love their vegetables, their fresh vegetables. So making that work for them is key. For other people, they could care less about having their broccoli in the evening, in which case they don't have to. So yeah, really just kind of figuring out what's going to be sustainable for the individual, and then what they're, feeling well with. If they love broccoli, but then they're having just horrendous GI distress, then we got to figure that out.
Well, that's why I always laugh at what is a carnivore diet. It is a strict elimination diet, because you look at oxalates, lectins, phytates, FODMAPs, the whole list of, they're all just vegetables. Animal are not plant-based. So you end up going to animal-based diet when you take out all the things that people are reactive to, especially when I do lab testing, you see people's food sensitivity tests that all these things, it's like, oh, well, yeah, you end up being on a carnivore diet unintentionally.
Yeah, and a lot of these fibers, I mean, they're getting converted to short chain fatty acids in the gut anyway. So I mean, they're being assimilated by us as a fatty acid. So we can kind of bypass that by not having them if one chooses to go that route. And honestly, if they're consuming a lot of raw foods, like it has to ferment in the gut, which is oftentimes not desirable. Like they're going to oftentimes experience more bloat, GI distress, and things of that nature. So just giving their body ample time to figure out how they're going to feel and respond, what their microbiome's looking like, and then adjusting accordingly is important.
Mm-hmm. And then go back to, we were talking a little bit about nutritional ketosis and going metabolic flexibility. Do you believe there is a need to be nutritional ketosis all the time, or should we flex in and out of ketosis?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So like right now, for instance, my protein is pretty high relative to my fat. I'm still consuming more calorie, like the vast majority of my calories are still coming from dietary fat. I'm at north of 50% of my total calories are coming from fat. However, I'm at 125 grams of fat and 200 grams of protein. So on a gram basis, I'm consuming much more protein than fat right now. As a result of that, my blood ketones are relatively low. I'm at about 0.2, 0.3 on a blood ketone meter. So if you were to go by the standard textbook definition of ketosis, I'm technically out of ketosis right now. Does that mean I'm less fat adapted? No, certainly not. I'm not worried about registering 0.2 and not 0.5 on a ketone meter because all of that metabolic machinery is there. And I am metabolizing fat as my primary fuel source and energy source. So I'm not worried about that. So a lot of people get hung up on, making sure they're 0.5 on a ketone monitor at all times, which I think is, again, majoring in the minors. Now, do I think that you have to introduce carbohydrates in order to maintain some degree of metabolic flexibility? No, I certainly do not think that either. If I was to consume, a cupcake right now, having not had a predominant carb source in 8 years, my body would know what to do with that glucose. Like it would still be metabolically sound and flexible in that sense. So I think there's been this notion to increase dietary carbohydrate intake just to be able to hold on to this metabolic flexibility state, which I don't think is necessary either.
That reminds me of the question we had on the low carb cruise of, a carb refeed day, and that we were all like, well, a lot of people are addicted to carbohydrates. And if they have that, it would set them off to a binge or eating disorder tendencies that they don't do well with the relationship with carbs, sugar. And if that carb refeed includes eating processed foods that are just like, could set people off onto a downhill spiral when they introduce those foods. And where there is the rules of a carb refeed, I think it depends on, is it necessary? And I don't think it is for most people, because that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's different people in my world of, having fruits is okay, but going down into this carb refeed day, what that means and is it necessary? But your goal is to be fat adapted. Do you need to have carb metabolism still functioning, or do you need to just stick with being in that fat burning state?
Yeah, I certainly don't think you have to include carbohydrates in order to maintain the metabolic machinery to metabolize carbohydrates for sure. I mean, that's just not physiologically how we function. So I wouldn't want people to worry about that. And when it comes to, psychological component, that's like a whole other conversation in and of itself. Like as a species, we're fickle creatures when it comes to our, relationship with food and our psychology around food. And yeah, so for some people, dabbling in increasing carbohydrates is just going to be a very slippery slope for them and result in a downward spiral. So for those individuals, they're much better off, eliminating as opposed to trying to moderate. But for the people that can moderate just fine, if that's something that they want to include, if they feel their quality of life improves by being a little bit more, flexible with their food sources, then by all means go for it.
And that is another topic of people that have a relationship with food that could be called a eating disorder, that if they are so strict and you're counting your calories and with experiences with eating disorders, how do you find to work well with people to help them change to helping build muscle and get healthier metabolically without being fixated on counting calories, counting the macros, and looking at all the detail, getting enough food in, and not having that eating disorder personality or mindset that like I'm fixated on what I'm eating all the time and the next meal when I'm eating, that it's negative versus positive, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
totally makes sense. There's definitely, and that's going to be totally different for each individual. Like some people are just naturally more prone to enjoy tracking macros and having everything dialed in. Like they find pleasure in that. So to tell them, hey, look, you've got a disorder, you don't need to be doing that, it's probably not a good thing. But for people that don't naturally want to be drawn to that, to say to them, hey, look, you have to do this indefinitely if you're ever going to find success in life, like that's going to be daunting for them as well. So really kind of leaning into what the personality type is. If there's someone that enjoys tracking and there's not a negative connotation around it, then by all means go for it. When it comes to tracking strictly from a body composition standpoint and reaching a health goal, I don't personally advocate for tracking indefinitely. Like what I do, what I find works to be really well, is when I'm in a prep with a very specific goal, with a very specific timeline, I will track everything as extensively as possible. But when that prep is over, my reverse diet is done, and I'm back to some degree of normalcy, I don't track as much. I don't track oftentimes at all. I'm making sure that I'm getting enough intuitively and consuming at a surplus to optimize for building muscle. But I take a break from the rigors of tracking during that phase, which allows me to be that much more strict when it is time to track because I have that on-off switch mentality. That's what's worked really well for me and seems to work well for a lot of people. But having a yin and yang relationship with it, so to speak, goes a long ways.
So go back to, you talked about reverse diet. We can touch on that a little bit more in depth because it's kind of like an athlete. We taper for a race and then do reverse taper. So what is a diet? Is that your, prep phase? You're getting into an event and then afterwards you kind of go opposite. Is that, talk about what reverse diet is for people?
Yeah, so reverse dieting in the context of a competitor, but also this holds true with anybody that's dieting at all, is it's basically the reverse of dieting. So like dieting is typically defined as, reduction of calories in some form or fashion. The reverse diet is a strategic increase in calories. That's a very high level definition of it. But like for me, for my protocol, for instance, I've got a 7-phase protocol for body composition. And phase 1 is simply establishing your current baseline, figuring out what your composition is, what your maintenance intake is, what your body fat, your lean tissue is, all that good stuff. And then I'll start at a high fat ratio, and then I'll transition to phase 2, which is starting at that high fat ratio, gradually dropping fat while simultaneously increasing protein to find that individual's unique protein threshold. Phase 3 is once I've found that threshold, I'll start dropping protein as well. So overall calories are continuing to drop. Phase 4 is the introduction of strategic ketogenic caloric refeed. So at that point, calories are pretty low. So I have a strategic increase once or twice a week of both fat and protein on a planned refeed day. Again, that's just a fat and protein refeed, no need for carbs. Phase 5 is the pinnacle of that cut. So for a competitor, it is the peak week of their show when they compete. For someone that's not competing, maybe it's the photo shoot they're getting leaned out for, or the wedding, or whatever it is that they're trying to, have as the pinnacle of their cut. And then from there, phase 6 is transitioning into the reverse diet, maintaining those refeeds. So as weekly calories increase, refeed calories decrease. And then phase 7 is returning to some degree of normalcy, kind of back to a maintenance intake and then a slight surplus eventually. So that's basically from a very high level view what that, cycle looks like for my prep protocol and transitioning from a caloric, surplus to a deficit back to a surplus.
Sounds very complicated and why you need a coach to help guide you through that.
Yeah, I mean, I can make it super simple. I can make it very in-depth, but like I've got a very specific protocol that works really well for body composition. So I've got it broken down into those phases there.
Well, I would think for us people that are, over 50, that we should want to focus on body composition changes because that's what you fight. And I always say, don't blame the aging process, embrace the aging process, change how you train and don't do what you used to do. And that's what, especially for females over males, I think we need to stop doing the 12 repetitions of everything and doing little weights that you have to switch to get results, and doing the heavier weights if it's the 3 to 5 repetitions, 3 to 5 sets, and doing that type of training to get results and changing how you fuel, I think is really essential. So many female athletes have struggling to lose weight. They need to reconsider what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to weight training, so like there's between males and females, there's not a whole lot of differences when it comes to the actual biomechanics of resistance training and building lean tissue. There are certainly a lot of differences when it comes to the hormonal component and things of that nature. But when it comes to just simply going to the gym and training hard and intense and recovering and things of that nature, like males and females can have a lot of parallels there. I mean, like there's not going to be you don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And I see a lot of females trying to avoid the resistance training because they're fearful of looking like males. You know, they don't want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger after a week of doing some bicep curls, which is just not going to happen. Like women would benefit compositionally speaking from training hard, you know, with a similar, you know, rep scheme and set number. But again, it really just, what do you find sustainable? What do you think you can endure for the long haul and enjoy for the long haul? And I think, you know, figuring out what that looks like for the individual is key.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's as I get into that age myself, and clients are 50, 60 years old that I've been working with, men and women, that it's like, all right, let's look at what you're doing. Because most people just go to cardio and they don't do this, like cut the cardio out, go for a walk, and then do this in the gym instead. Get off the machines and spending time on that. Have you ever tried with yourself or clients the blood flow restrictive bands?
Yes, I have done them. I don't do them very frequently, but I do think they're certainly efficacious. I feel like they're really good as well when you have an injury, because you can, like, say you have, you know, a lower back injury or something like that, and you can't do squats. So you don't want to do like a heavy, you know, squat deadlift or something. You could stimulate the muscle and increase blood flow while also using the BFR bands and have much less, you know, load on your spinal structure. So for something like that, it'd be really good to implement during a recovery phase or during a deload week or something like that, in which you want to stimulate the muscle, force a lot of fluid blood flow into that tissue, but not subject your skeletal structure to near as much of a load.
Yeah, I've been trying them out because I always hurt my back and my mechanics aren't right, tight hips, but just trying, instead of doing heavy barbell lifting squats, but do that instead has been my current experiment, because I've had them for a long time, a year now, and I finally started experimenting, going, these really work. It's crazy.
Yeah, and they're brutal too. I mean, it makes 5 pounds seem very humbling.
Well, so I usually go to the gym, but I have these 5-pound weights. I think I've had them for 20 years. They're ancient. And then I have some ball Pilates 3-pound weights. And I was trying to arm stuff with it and doing some jumping jacks with my BFR bands on. Wow. So I've been doing this little demo, how it really does burn you out over time. So it's funny. Okay. So what are you working on? What's your passion currently? I know you're just really driven individual. You're the keto bricks. People can get that quality fat in a brick form. So what kind of things, what's your why? What is this, like, you're so on it and driven and motivated. So what's kind of your focus right now?
A lot of different whys. I just want to be the very that I can be. I recognize that I'm going to die someday, and I want to make my mark on this world in the best way I know how with the time I'm allocated. So I'm really trying to excel, you know, and I think the business that we've built is a good vehicle for offering value and adding value back to this community, which has helped me so much. So yeah, we've got the Keto Brick business, super passionate about that. We're always trying to be on the cutting edge of nutrition in that regard. I've got the coaching, the Keto Savage, the content creation component. I've got several competitions coming up this year. So using that as a vehicle to test these different experiments and figure out what works and what I can replicate in clientele and other people that are interested. I'm building out an online course right now that basically encompasses all these lessons that I'm learning through the prep. And then we've got some other things in the pipeline, but yeah, just continue to grow the different legs of the business. And, you know, we've got a son now. I've got a 15-month-old son. So he gives me all kinds of purpose and reason to live in life. And I just want to be the very best I could be as a father to him.
He's definitely a mini you. So he's so cute. So with that, what age were you when you opened your Keto Brick office, factory, whatever company?
Yeah, so we launched Keto Brick in 2018, and we launched Keto Savage in 2016.
Wow.
But we kept the business in-house from day one. Like most food manufacturing companies, they'll outsource it. They'll have some co-packer do it. And for me, it was never designed to be a product initially. It was something that I wanted to do to solve my own nutritional questions and problems. So I've just always kept the production in-house. We're making these at our own commercial facility. I'm overseeing all the ingredient control, all the everything so that I can ensure utmost quality to our consumers.
Wow. And what keto brick, just go into what that is real quick. People don't know what it is yet.
So it is a 1,000 calorie ketogenic shelf stable meal replacement bar made with really high quality ingredients. The base of most of the flavors, all the flavors currently, we're working on some new flavors, is raw organic cacao butter. So that's a very high source of stearic acid, even more so than that of like beef tallow or suet, for instance. So just a really easily digestible fat source that is a great form of energy for someone that is fat adapted. So that's pretty much what the bricks are. We have, some that are made with a plant-based protein, some that are made with animal-based protein, and we're just trying to always offer great tasting value adds with that. And then, that's pretty much what the brick is in a nutshell.
Why would someone want 1,000 calories? When would you use that?
Well, it's pretty versatile. Like we have it at 1,000 calories because it's a really good way for us to produce them in a cost-effective manner for the individual. Like the brick is made with significantly higher ingredients than you're going to get in any other bar. Like I can guarantee it. But because we're able to do it in a 1,000-calorie brick, the cost per calorie for the consumer is less than that of a Snickers bar. So you don't have to consume the full 1,000-calorie brick. A lot of customers will, cut it into pieces, or they melt it down and they put it in silicone molds and harden them up at like smaller bite-sized pieces. But I can offer a lot more value at a lower cost per calorie to the people than if I was to make them much smaller.
Just asking all these questions that people would ask me. So just passing on. I think too, I have two people I know doing this Trans Rockies hiking trail run race next week. That's 5 days. And I was thinking what to take for fuel when you are doing a fat burning long distance event, and they're only going to have probably processed foods at the aid stations. That's a great thing to have, a keto brick when you're out there like that.
Yeah, they're really popular with like backpackers and hunters. That nature. Like if you're wanting to, because I mean, they're like 145, 150 grams and it's 1,000 calories. They don't take up much space. So for people that are wanting to backpack into the mountains with them, they're really good for them.
I have a client in Italy do you sell it Europe, around different parts of the world?
Yeah, we sell it where international shipping is just obscene right now. So we're trying to find local wholesale distributors in different countries so that people can get them cheaper shipping, locally there.
Yeah. I have a client who's doing a month-long trip in Africa. They help, poaching, help against poaching. So they are out there, but I was trying to work on his nutrition when he's in Africa for a month, and they don't have good sources, but that's why he needs a keto brick.
Get me in touch with them. I'll send them some bricks because I totally can get behind that, message of ending poaching. So I'd love to hook them up with some bricks.
Awesome. I will. Okay, so everyone can find the links in the show notes where we want to send everyone to get keto bricks. Keto Savage is where your training coaching programs are.
KetoBrick.com, Keto Brick on social for the bricks, and KetoSavage.com and Keto Savage on social for me.
Are you doing more conferences, as everyone seems to be conference every other weekend lately?
There are so many conferences. And then we had several more planned this year, but unfortunately they all all the remaining conferences conflict with my competition schedule. So I'm just focusing on competitions the rest of the year.
Yeah, there's not a lot of conferences over here on the West Coast. They all seem to be on your East Coast side of the world. So we're hosting a meetup event on September 9th at my house in North San Diego, trying to get those that are over this region to come on over, and we'll do our own meetup barbecue. But it's hard to get out to East Coast events.
Yeah, there's so many conferences nowadays, which is great. I mean, the more the merrier, but if you try to go all of them, you would definitely run yourself ragged for sure.
Yeah, I would. So last question, how do you manage your stress? You've got so much going on. You have a young child, business, your workouts. How do you manage your stress? It's always a big thing.
All right. So I honestly don't feel overly stressed right now. I don't get enough sleep. I'll be the first to admit that, but I've tried to be very present. And when I'm in a prep like I am now, that becomes even more critical. So one thing that I've done recently that's been very, very helpful is I'll wake up and then immediately have everything prepped and ready to go, grab it in a bag, drive to the compound, and then I've got at least 2 or 3 hours of undisturbed alone time where I can just drink my coffee and work creatively and plan the day and the week. And as simple as that sounds, simply having that undisturbed alone time where I'm not automatically looking at my phone or scrolling on social media is like, that is my oasis right there. So that has been super positive for me.
Good. Yeah, I think setting boundaries, limiting our time on social media is a big thing because it's always exhausting to me. So you have to limit that. So finding self-care time is good.
Doing physical outdoor labor too. Like we work on a fence this past weekend. I love, cutting down trees, driving the tractor, like things like that are not, relaxing necessarily from a physical standpoint. Like I'm still doing hard labor, but it is mentally relaxing for me.
It is. I just think, yeah, being in outdoors is why we moved from Seattle down north San Diego, even though it's cloudy today, but we have this big outdoor yard that is just being outside. It just gives you so much just centering and grounding, helps you
Yeah. Have the outdoors.
relax. So good. Well, thanks for your time today. And we'll keep following your progress, and everyone can follow you on social media and get the blog post too that you send out with all the details. It's pretty cool. So
Awesome. Well,
thanks.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right.